Вітаю всіх, хто приєднався до нас. З вами Ольга Таманова.
This is Olga Tamaeva and Media Center in Ukrinform. Now we'll talk about the situation in Kherson region. Live with us is the Kherson region governor, Hennadii Lahuta. Hennadii, hello, can you hear me? Yeah, loud and clear. Glory to Ukraine, glory to the heroes. Quite recently we have heard the statement of the advisor of your office that the Ukrainian defenders repelled the Russians and threw them back from the first defense echelon. That was the statement of Serhiy Khlanya, the deputy of the regional council. For the last 2 weeks, our armed forces have tactical successes in the area of Kherson region on the borders of Kherson and Mykolaiv and Kherson and Dnipropetrovsk regions. At some point of time, I'm convinced this will be a counterattack which will liberate Kherson region. Let's not comment deeper on this. Let our armed forces do their job. They know how to do it. And I confirm that we do have some tactical successes. And we are all awaiting when this will bring strategic successes and full deoccupation of the Kherson region. Great news, we are all waiting for liberation of Kherson region. But for the time being, let's discuss about what's going on in the region. What is the social and humanitarian situation in your region? What's happening with the cell coverage? It's unavailable. What about the access to the medicines for local population? Well, all of the issues that you just have mentioned, it's all bad. And I'm telling this in each and every of my interviews. The situation is critical. So far, the occupier haven't opened a single humanitarian corridor, and we've been under occupation from day one. So there are so many outstanding problems here. But what I would like to discuss with you now is the problems that keep escalating in terms of the dealings of the occupiers with medics, school teachers who left after finishing the school year under the Ukrainian curriculum. Doctors have been blackmailed to come to work to hospitals. They try to coerce the teachers to sign contracts so that they would start collaborating with the occupiers. The situation is difficult indeed. But people are hanging. Everybody waits for the liberation, of course, but the pressure on the people who are performing their functional duties, including under the Geneva Convention, become more and more difficult. Yeah, that's true. But what about the guerrilla war fighting? We've heard about separate standalone events, but even the occupiers claim that these are the confirmation of the guerrilla movement inside of Kherson region. So what can you tell us, what we Ukrainians can help such a movement in Kherson region? We all heard about the explosion of Audi Q7 with 2 people in. One, Yevgeny Sobolev, the governor of penitentiary colony number 90, which at the beginning of the invasion performed heroic pro-Ukrainian deeds. At least it looked like what he was doing, supporting Kherson with bread and everything else. But then only he would know what happened, and he became a traitor and keeps playing a substantial role in supporting the occupiers with all his resources. So the explosion did happen. I was the eyewitness myself. The only thing that does not correlate with the reality is amputation of both arms and legs. Well, both people in that car are alive. They're in the hospital right now with traumas of different level of severity. Yevgeny Sobolev, for instance, has both legs wounded. That's true. But the talks that they've been amputated are not true. Also, in the restaurant on the riverbank of in Kherson, and I can comment only what our military have already told today. 3 servicemen were killed to death. The Russian Federation soldiers. Hopefully, you've seen it on the Pivden, the Southern Command's news. What is the information about relaunching the operation of the Kyiv port? Yeah, they want to relaunch both the city of Kherson and the city of Skadovsk, thinking how they will be taking out the products from Kherson region, which was feeding not only the whole of Ukraine but the whole of Europe. And let me remind you that on the way towards 2 checkpoints at Kalanchar and Chengar, there are endless queues of vans that bring the stolen grain to Crimea. Well, we have seen, and from the media, that the farmers are forced to sell their crops for peanuts. Is it true? And what do then farmers usually would do if they're faced with this? Well, I confirm this information because the prices that they claim is what they are ready to pay to buy out the barley, whose harvest will start right now, and of wheat, whose harvesting will start in a week's time. They're so minimal that they don't even cover the investments. So I think those cars I mentioned, they sell the grain from the last year's harvest, but after we start collecting this year, we'll start collecting information what the agrarians of Kherson region are doing, because the price that is given by the so-called businessmen from the Autonomous Republic of Crimea, well, of course, they are far from being markets. They are far below even the break-even prices for our agrarians. Colleagues, you can ask your own questions, so go ahead, your questions. Can you hear me? Yes. There was an information that the government is creating a Kherson center. So when would those centers be launched into operation? I haven't heard your question. There was information that the authorities are working on establishing and launching into operation the Kherson Residence Center. If that's true, when those centers will be launched into operation at the territories that are not occupied. That, yeah, they mean about Kyiv and some other cities. Yeah, Kyiv and other regions of Ukraine. Well, I can only confirm that from first days of war, it's working. It's an open secret that after the occupation happened, we started working in Mykolaiv. But when the Dnipropetrovsk region have 26 villages deoccupied there, so now we have such centers in the cities of Mykolaiv and Kryvyi Rih. In Kryvyi Rih, they have 5 such centers there, where any resident could receive humanitarian assistance. Now we started handing out the secondary learning degrees, which could be handed out to 16,600 secondary school graduation marks. So we would like to thank all the authorities to allow us to launch those centers into operation from day one of this invasion. Colleagues, any further questions? Well, please let me add to the question that a colleague asked, namely, since there's a huge flow of people going through occupied Melitopol and Vasylinka towards Zaporozhye this week, a center will be opened in the city of Zaporozhye. 2 of our employees have been transferred to work there, and they will be receiving Kherson residents who are driving on their cars in both ways. It's Kherson universities are currently operating in other regions which are being controlled by the armed forces of Ukraine. What about colleges? How many of them are there? How are they being administered? I mean, on the territories that are currently controlled by the armed forces of Ukraine. Well, you know what? The colleges have finished their school year. We have a couple of them which we have already transferred. But the universities, there are not so many of them in Kherson region, while there were so many more colleges, so we can only share a couple of examples. With the rest, we're still working, we're still thinking what needs to be done next. Mr. Hennadii, can you tell us, please, is it impossible to leave Kherson right now? So did the occupiers fully block the ability of our citizens to move to the territories controlled by Ukraine? Well, there is such an opportunity still to move, but only in 2 directions. Towards temporarily occupied Crimea, where the occupiers let people go, but they did it all the time before. The enemy completely blocked the access to Mykolaiv and Dnipropetrovsk region, the path of Live, Bereslavl, Davidov Brod. Now, in addition to access to Crimea, we can confirm that people, and they do, can leave through occupied Melitopol and Vasylyivka all the way to Zaporozhye. That's what I started with. What about the disappearances of people? In the open sources, we've seen lots of information that people in Kherson region keep disappearing, and there is no idea where they are being taken to. So do you have any information about this? Of course, we have mentioned it before. Already more than 600 people are currently being imprisoned. Activists, the anti-terrorist operation veterans, people who with their whole civilian position say that they are against what's going on. They are kept in different places. The pre-trial prison in Kherson region, the police office in Novokakhovka, Kakhovka, Genichi, Skadovsk, with the cells in those premises. Also the premises of the rest and recreation facilities, which we have hundreds in Kherson region. Out of the most prominent people who are top in Kherson region, the mayor of Gola Pristan, Babich Alexander, and it's not only that this person has been in prison for almost 3 months now, it's just that we have only operational information where he might be kept. So let's hope that he is alive. But this is the hugest problem for us right now, like all the other people who are being kidnapped and currently being apprehended by the enemy. If there are no further questions, I would like to thank you, Mr. Hennadii, for joining us. Oh, no, we have a question, sorry.
Are you planning to call Kherson people to evacuate when the counterattack is more counterattack by Ukraine army to Crimea side? Are you planning to call Kherson people to evacuate to Crimea because of the counterattack by Ukraine army?
Ви почули питання, пане Геннадію?
Mr. Gennady, have you heard the question? No, nothing. Our foreign journalist asks whether you are asking the Kherson residents to keep evacuating, even if it's to the occupied territory. But what's important is that the local authorities have some clear message to the local residents that whether they have to be evacuated or not. From day one of the invasion, the authorities have been dealing with official corridors for evacuation. All of us can clearly remember when the buses have already prepared with ambulances and all the other cars in the escort. So there were a couple of attempts that when those convoys have already entered the Kherson region, but they have been turned around by the enemy. So since we have no official corridor, we cannot ensure the safety for people. We cannot claim to them, yeah, take this route and you'll be safe. We cannot tell this to people. We're not. And now we have about 50% of the Kherson region, up to 50%, is when people don't want to stay in this under occupation, basically, observing everything that is happening. So those people will form their own convoys and leave on their own. So then we will make sure that at least we can provide whatever assistance we can to them. Well, we urge, if there is an opportunity, please leave the region. But you remember about the examples when the convoys have been shelled or blown up on the mines with lots of casualties, so that's still a problem. According to your assessment, how many people are still staying in Kherson region? I believe half of Kherson region, because 1.5 million people previously lived in Kherson before the invasion. Right now, I think there are certain people who are being employed elsewhere right now, about half left, so 450,000 up to 500,000 residents is how many we still have of our citizens at the temporarily occupied territory. That was the governor of the Kherson region, Hennadii Lahuta. Thank you for joining us. Our next briefing, let me remind you, will be at 5 p.m. Irina Vereshchuk, Vice Prime Minister, Minister on reintegration of temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine, and we'll talk with her about how they work with temporarily occupied territories with internally displaced persons. We'll discuss the exchange of the prisoners and the humanitarian